Hi, Product School. Great to be here, and thank you, Product School, for the opportunity to talk to all of you. My name is Arun Mohan, and I'm really thrilled for this opportunity to share some of my thoughts about being a better people PM, and we'll spend the entire session talking about what that means and how to make sense of it. These capture some of my learnings over the last 10 years or so of my PM career, things I've learned from others, things I've learned from failures I've had, and what generally tends to work well for me. And hopefully it sparks a few thoughts and ideas for you to consider in your day-to-day PM job or as you think about becoming a PM. Before we dive in, a little bit more about me. No, I'm not a space nerd. I just found this template to be pretty cool, so I just used it. I'm currently lead product for Credit Karma Home. It's not the homepage for Credit Karma. Credit Karma's mortgage and home buying related offerings. It's one of our newer products. So I've been at Credit Karma for about 5 years. I've always worked on the 0 to 1 products. Before mortgages and home products, I was on our auto finance related offerings. And prior to that, I spent about 4+ years or so at Moody's Analytics, working on enterprise wholesale lending platforms, doing product there. So, I have a bunch of things laid out on the slide, but the thing I wanted to share was, one of the principles I try to practice every day is about embracing change. And that really helps me stay grounded. And who I am today is captured by many of the changes, some of which are listed here in my life, in my career. And that's made me who I am, and that's something I continue to practice. And I do think at the core of a strong product team or a product development team is that ability to embrace change, adapt quickly based on learnings, quickly establish a new focus, and keep moving forward without losing drive. And I think as a PM, as a product leader, you have a tremendous amount of influence over how those team dynamics actually get crafted. So that's what we're here to talk today about. And that's the whole people PM concept, I guess. So let's talk about the different kinds of PMs and how sort of people PMs fit in. And I like to think about this as, what is your superpower? And you may have seen a bunch of articles and content about types of PMs, core skills. This is just one way to slice the pie the way I like to, and it's actually inspired by a conversation I had a couple of years ago with one of my managers. So I've listed 4 types here. So let's start with, not in that order on the slide, but let's start with technical PM. So technical PMs is someone whose superpowers, you're really strong with data and engineering problems, and you're highly likely to come from an engineering background, right? If you're user experience PM, you just have a natural bent for user empathy, consumer design, to solve user problems. And you may have had past experience sort of exercising that muscle in a design or marketing background. You're the PM who understands the importance of every single word of copy that goes into the product. If you're a business PM, you're able to really understand what moves the needle in terms of key metrics, key business metrics, with a really deep understanding of data and the product funnel, and know where to place the right bets. Growth PMs or growth-oriented PMs tend to be very savvy, and like business PMness tends to be their superpower. And then the last thing is people PMs, what we're here to talk about, and no guesses for what I think my superpower is. If you're a people PM, you have high amount of emotional intelligence, and you really understand what motivates the team. You're able to instill a rock solid team culture and to nurture strong partnerships. You're really able to up-level everyone's output and joy of just building something awesome together. And you must be thinking, like, doesn't every PM, like a technical PM, UX PM, need people skills? Absolutely. I do think every PM needs to have sort of a foundation for all of these. But one of them tends to be your superpower, and leaning into that is a great way to kind of grow your PM career. And often I find that people skills are mentioned as like a foundational skill, but not as a standalone identity. But I personally do think it is, and I have been able to grow my career by really emphasizing on how to work with people and build great products together. And at Credit Karma specifically over the years, this has actually been a core tenet of our hiring strategy, driven by our ex-chief product officer, Nikhil Singhal, we valued EQ over IQ. We believe that IQ is more table stakes, but EQ is what really gives you that edge as a PM, especially at growth companies where things are constantly changing. So why does this matter? Let's just dive into a couple more reasons or constructs for why this is so important for building great products. I thought this research was quite fascinating and told a great story. And it was published a little while ago and talks about why do startups fail. And 7 out of top 20 reasons came out to be related to people or culture. So things like lack of passion, disharmony amongst the team, or losing focus, to name a few. Over the years, the role of the PM has definitely evolved into more of a leadership role. We have a lot more influence over the team and the culture. So this is mastering sort of people skills is a powerful tool to have as we go into sort of the next wave of great products. The second thing I wanted to talk about in terms of why this is important is this notion of team identity. And this is, again, teams, it's a team concept, but you will see this as a thread throughout the presentation. But the broader note is, as a PM, you have a tremendous amount of power to actually make a difference. So teams with strong cultures have a strong identity, and that identity drives the sense of pride, which drives a lot of motivation. And a motivated group is an execution powerhouse. For example, my team at Credit Karma, over the last 3 years since I've been on the current team, we've been known as the happiest team, the scrappiest team. We're the underdogs. Over the last 3+ years, we have tested multiple products and failed many times. We've really struggled to get off the ground in terms of revenue. We've canceled multiple big projects because of external factors. But, over time, we've grown into one of the fastest growing verticals, Credit Karma. And despite the growth and the new team members, our identity has stayed relatively consistent. So I would encourage you to think about, your current team or your future product team. Like, ask yourself, what's your team's identity? And if you can't think of one, it doesn't have to be written down as morals or values or principles, but if you can't even think of one, then maybe you need to really double down on establishing that. And I think during the times you're in right now with, pandemic resulting in complete transformation of how we work, how we connect with people and establishing these identities is even more important. And leading your team through times like these as a PM will result in you and the team emerge that much stronger. All right. With that said, in that context, let's dive into what can you do to be a better people PM. And I categorize this into the 3 C's of skills: context, collaboration, and care. As we go through each of these areas, you'll definitely notice there's a good amount of overlap. And that's kind of the point here. It's hard to put people skills in a box. It's nuanced and it's complex because people are complex. But I'm going to try to provide a little bit of structure and a few guidelines for you to think about some of these concepts. All right, context. Let's start with the first one here. So, I like to tell people a product manager is a context manager in many ways. And some of you may have heard the story of this elephant and blindfolded men who were asked to touch various parts of the elephant and to say, what did they think it was? And, as you can see in this picture, they all thought it was something different. Is it a fan? Is it a snake? Is it a tree? And you can imagine the same sort of scenario happening within a product team, right? Like if your designer is designing something not knowing what the ultimate goal is, or if your engineer is just engineering it in a way where it is not going to scale to where the product needs to go, then that's a problem. You're not all moving in the right direction. So this is where the product manager really comes in. I think in many ways, the PM's primary job is to bring clarity and alignment within the team around the why and where we are headed, or North Star, as we'd say. I did manage to squeeze in a star analogy in this galaxy template, but yeah, I think focusing on the why and what are the problems you're solving and why Project X matters to the business. How do you make sure the team clearly understands that and set that context? So in many ways, can you help the team see the elephant, right? That's super key here. So let's talk about a few things you can do, sort of practically, and how do you put context setting in action. So setting context upfront is obvious, but it's very critical. So the more time you do upfront setting context with your cross-functional team, the more runway you'll get as a PM in terms of collaboration and the time you have to actually get ahead and think of future projects. So as an example, having a project kickoff meeting where you actually focus more just on the context and why you're doing something, or you have a quarterly set of goals that you have established and you want to kick off the quarter, have that kickoff meeting with the team and talk about the goals and the priorities and why they are the top goals, right? You can also do that during weekly basis when you have, say, sprint planning sessions, when you get together to decide what you should work on. So that is sort of upfront context setting and over various different timeframes. But as your team grows and the product grows, there's going to be a lot of things to keep track of. So repetition is really, really crucial. So one of the ways you can do this is actually having weekly team updates. We do this every week on my team at Credit Karma, where we get together and we talk about how are we progressing towards our goals that we set up. And talk about any key shifts that may have happened in terms of our strategy and what may have happened. Is it external, internal, and so on? And we create that forum to discuss the why as a group and what's going on. And it's important for these to structure the content in a consistent format week over week, so the context really sits, so especially like your quarterly goals. The third thing I'll say is explaining the rationale for changes to requirements. Earlier on in my career, I'd focus a lot on the what of the decision. For example, what are we building? What priority has changed? What JIRA ticket has been updated? But it's this is my favorite example. Like, it's the difference between going to an engineer and saying, "Hey, can we change this button color on this page?" versus we want to ensure we follow accessibility rules, so even colorblind folks can actually use our product well. So can you change this button color to be in line with what it's required for that to happen? In the former situation, your engineer might just change that one button color and go home. But if you provide that context, they will likely let you know 3 other places in the product where the same change needed to be made that you hadn't thought of. So that's the difference between focusing more on the context. And the last thing I'll say is, context is not just important when you're on track and it's just so your week over week cadence, but it's also more important when things actually get tough. Projects can get canceled, for example. Like, we recently had to deal with something like that on the team because of unforeseen circumstances. The team had been working really hard on a project. It was very gutting to make that decision, but when we focused the team on the original goal of the project and explained why the project had gone a little bit off track for these reasons from those original goals for the consumer, it was very easy for the team to understand, and we could move on to the next project and without feeling like people were left in the dark. So those are a few examples. There are plenty more about how you can do this sort of in one-on-one interactions and so on, but context is everything. A couple of tips or pressure tests. I'm going to try to weave some of these in throughout the deck. The first one is, ask yourself as a PM, like, can everyone on your team or majority of your team explain to you what are your top goals as a team and why they were chosen? And this doesn't need to be like, this is kind of a gold standard, right? It's a gold standard you can work from, and you can observe this when you have conversations with people on your team to see if they can repeat it back to you, or the moment you see that they are able to tell you context, that means you have done a great job. And that's the bar I try to set for myself, and I would encourage you to use that as a framework if that helps you. The second thing I'll say is practice transparency. I think if you not constantly thinking about what should I share, what should I not share, and the default is I just want to be sharing all possible details possible, and there's nuance here, but think about transparency and being transparent with your team. I think context will naturally follow. So it's just a tip. All right, so that was context. Now let's talk about the second C, collaboration. And this is a concept for all teams in all industries and domains, but definitely within tech and product management, we talk about this a lot. So but it's collaboration. It's just how we get things done together, right? As a PM, the more you can focus on enabling and empowering your partners or your team to achieve those goals and outcomes together, the better. And that's when you start to become a master collaborator. So I wanted to share a few core ideas or principles that have helped me do this better over the years. I'll start by introducing what I think of sort of two ways of partnering with various stakeholders or cross-functional folks on your team. The first one is service-driven. So think of this as a relay race, right? You're all competing. You're all get headed to that finish line, but it's always like one job is done and then the next one picks off, and then you keep going forward. So it's a finish my task mentality. Whereas if you have more of an outcome-driven mentality where it's not just that I need to do my job and move on, it's I need to make sure that the ultimate outcome is what the team is looking for. So then you start to create one of a shared ownership mentality. So the example here is like a Tough Mudder race where you're there at the finish line when you finish, and you can't move forward until one person's done with a certain task or so, and then you're constantly helping each other to get to that outcome. So the more you can push towards the outcome-driven shared ownership mentality, the more you can actually drive collaboration within the team. Now I want to walk you through a couple of examples of how you could actually do this in your PM career. The first one I want to talk about is the PRD, or the product requirements document. When people ask me what is sort of one of the mistakes or one key thing that you've learned more in my PM career so far, one of the top things that come to my mind is thinking of the PRD as a doc that I own as a PM, but I like to think of the PRD as a team document, right? So if you look at sort of the rough timeline from left to right here, you as a PM, you still have to outline the context, the background for the project, what problem you're solving, what are the key risks and the business considerations, and even in terms of the core product requirements, using things like a high level user flow or the flow of data just to illustrate what we're talking about. And then stop there. And then turn that doc into a collaborative document and open it up to everybody on your team. And the team gets to ask a ton of questions about the context, about the core user flows, things like edge cases, technical constraints, design constraints, et cetera, all start to emerge from those collaborations. Like, it's always one of the joys of my day when I see people from various different functional areas commenting within, say, a Google Doc that was created, right? So then you leave some time for that back and forth, and that collaboration leads to the answers you're looking for, and that answers essentially is your final requirements. So you do that, you let the team do more of that work, and you guide the team to make sure you've set the guardrails to make sure we're headed in the right direction. And then ultimately, once you have all of those comments resolved and all the answers, then it becomes a lot easier as a PM to document all of that details into super detailed requirements that the engineering team can start executing upon. So it's just a mindset shift, but this is one tactical bit in terms of PRD writing that you can take that shared ownership mindset and be more collaborative. The second one I want to talk about is working with design, and it's a constant question that that I get, like how do you work better with designers? And I've definitely worked on teams where that designer's role was just reduced to just making something look pretty, a pixel painter. Certain companies accept this to be okay, but I think it's a huge missed opportunity. You have a wonderful creative mind with a lot of user empathy, whose potential is being limited, and you as a PM can help create that space for designers to explore more divergent ideas, which often results in better solutions. And I really love this illustration from Suilin Yu, who is currently at Google. And she talks about, in her Medium post, about her experience transitioning from design to product. And oftentimes our job as PMs is to say no. So the rest of the team can focus on saying yes. In this case, for designers, PM can help carve out enough time for research, for user testing and design explorations, and set expectations with stakeholders so design can really focus on saying yes, and we can do this, right? So that's another example where you let people shine with their skills by collaborating effectively and driving more shared ownership. Cool. Both of the concepts, the examples that I shared, involves you letting go, but it's still, you have to find your ways to still be plugged in, because the last thing you want is you lose the context yourself. Good shared documentation, one-on-one working sessions, etc., really help with this. The next concept for collaboration I wanted to introduce is this notion of allies. Shared ownership, focusing on better outcome, etc., really help a lot more with execution. But if you're in the earlier days of the product development cycle and you're working on a new idea or a new strategy, one important approach that I found to be helpful is this concept of allies, which is people on the team who are maybe a little bit more motivated about solving this problem than the rest. They can really help act as a bridge between you and the rest of the team. For example, the technical complexity around a project because of some gnarly API integration that's involved, or some new service that needs to be built for that feature, is really exciting for your eng partner. So buddy up with your eng lead as you flesh out that project and the strategy, and you evangelize and you get alignment. Another example could be a design might require a lot more user research and testing, so you can lean on your designer as your buddy. And when you present to the rest of your team about your idea or strategy, try switching roles. Have them talk about the context and the business needs, and then you step in and talk about the research, or you talk about the technical requirements and the tech stack and some of the challenges that we might run into. And then you start to build that sort of really tight partnership with your ally, and that really helps you move the project forward. And that sort of concept of sort of stepping into each other's shoes is what I want to talk about next, which is co-learning. I genuinely believe that teams that are focused on learning and teams that learn together build better products. The basic idea of co-learning is like team members develop trust and learn how to work as a team when they're faced with challenges that none of them have solved before, and they need to use and learn from each other how to navigate that challenge. Think of this as a Venn diagram, and like in this one I've only shown design, product, and engineering, but it could be marketing, it could be BD, it could be partnerships, and where you have those overlapping intersections, it's what I like to call learning zones. That's where the magic happens in terms of collaboration. So think about making the lines between your various teams a little bit softer. And for example, let engineers interact directly with designers to actually push a feature forward. Let marketing work directly with partnerships on a new partner campaign. And as a PM, lead by example. For example, invest time in really understanding the tech stack or the architecture of the product, so you can be more empathetic towards engineering. People say PM is the glue of the team or the translation layer for various functions. I totally believe this is true, but you get to a more collaborative environment when you're not taking on all of that translation upon yourself, but instead cultivating a culture where the whole team is actually doing that with each other. So focus on learning and try to build learning zones within your team. All right, that brings us to the third C. Context collaboration, a little bit more tactical, a little bit more tangible, and now we're getting down to some of the more touchy-feely, I guess, with care. At the core of care is really caring for the team as humans and not just as resources. It's very easy as PMs, since we're always hustling to ensure things ship on time or delivering results, we often end up in this trap. And I myself used to be in this boat where the number of times I would complain about not having engineering bandwidth or design taking forever to finish up what I thought was a very simple task. Those things still happen, but I care for them. I try to care for them as humans and put in the effort to understand their perspective, so it makes for a way healthier environment. And this includes things like genuinely care about their personal life and how they're doing. And it's especially important during these crazy times we're in. Just check in and understand how someone's doing. Be authentic, be vulnerable, share how you're feeling. That's how you get people to open up, and that's how you build those connections within the team. And be very clear about your intentions. It's good to explicitly say that you care. Sometimes we don't do that enough. Be compassionate. If you are able to understand someone else's problems, try to help solve those problems and offer help and see what you can do. So you get the broader point. I think the key nuance that I think a lot of people miss, though, is that it's not one size doesn't fit all, right? You can think of, oh, all engineers are a certain way, or all designers are a certain way. You establish a lot of these stereotypes, and that's really, really not true. I think the real magic happens when you're able to spend time one-on-one to understand how people's motivations, goals, their situations, their working styles, how do they vary? How can you adjust your style based on an individual to show that you care for their personal well-being and their growth, right? Invest in their growth, and not just to get things done, right? And one way, I think, one positive way, I think, to do this is really trying to understand what each person's strengths are and really help amplify them, right? So, for example, I currently work with our lead analyst on the team, and he's really strong on the business side and highly motivated with the idea of us winning over competition. And off late, we were really looking for more opportunities for short-term revenue growth, and I was able to focus. I recognized that drive in him and was able to give him that space. So he led the charge to identify new opportunities in the product to drive revenue, including the communication, the collaboration, give him that space to shine. And that paid off, and that's really starting to help him grow within his career. So this wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had a relationship with him already where we had talked openly about his hopes, dreams, and fears. So I was able to help him and guide him. The next concept, well, not really a concept, but ultimately relationships come down to trust. And I like to think of this as you have a trust roadmap with every person on your team. A trust ultimately is knowing that someone will be there to back you up when you fail because you know they did their best, right? The biggest advice that I have to all PMs, like be deliberate about your conversations around trust. So every time someone new joins your team, like talk about, hey, I want to build trust with you. Here are some of the things that I see along the way. Let's try to understand each other about how we work, what's your working style with PMs, and let's build that trust together and align on clear things that you can establish and check in on a timeline, like every month, come back and see how you're doing and how you're feeling about that trust roadmap. As you grow further in your leadership career within product, you might become a little bit more removed from folks who are actually building day to day. So even in that context, it's important to set up one-on-ones with folks on the team, the engineers on the team that you may not work with every day, to show that you as a leader care and you want to establish an environment of trust and safety where they feel like they can be bold and take risks. So trust trumps everything. Building trust is hard, but once you do it, preserving trust is equally important as building it. So what reinforces that trust once you have that established, I think, is feedback. Feedback is both giving and receiving, obviously, and left to right, I think it gets harder. If you've done the work of really understanding what motivates someone and what inspires someone, what their goals are, what their context is, then you'll be able to personalize that feedback. For example, if someone on the team has said, hey, I really like one of my goals is actually try to be better at communication and presentations and public speaking. So if there's a forum where you actually saw that person give a presentation, you have the opportunity to give some feedback because you know that is something that person's focused on. Right? So try to personalize when you give feedback, and very important to balance both positive and constructive feedback, and that's how you reinforce trust, and that's how you show that you really care. Receiving feedback is not always easy, and this is something I work on every single day, to always take a step back, be grateful for the feedback, whatever it is. Ideally, it's area for improvement, so you have a chance to actually double down and grow in that area. So be grateful for people who are giving you feedback, and be very clear about that gratitude so they know you appreciate it and they should keep doing it, right? The last thing that I put behind an animation, because I think it's very rare. I don't think we do that enough on teams, which is, ask for feedback as a PM. It's not a comfortable thing for everybody to be giving feedback sort of proactively. Some people are great at it. But if you care about building a great culture, a collaborative culture, and building strong partnerships within the team, make sure at a very regular frequency, you're asking for feedback around what you can do better, how you can work together. And then when next time when you come back, you circle back to what you talked about last time and calibrate together to make sure you're reinforcing the trust. All right, so we've covered all 3 C's. I hope you found some of those constructs and ideas helpful. And as we kind of wrap up here, I wanted to sort of put a few pointers out there in terms of how you can use this and a few key things to consider, which are very important. First of all, these are not rules or by the book best practices, and working with people is more art than science. So adapt it to your style. These are not excuses to avoid being detail oriented in your work. The example I gave about writing PRDs collaboratively, sometimes if you don't approach it the right way and explain your intentions, it can seem like you're trying to shy away from work. But in the long run, it really pays off if you help the team understand why it's being done that way. And which is the third point. If you're trying something new, if you're running, everything is an experiment. If you're running an experiment in terms of a process or meetings or how you collaborate, be very clear about it with your manager and your team. So no one's caught off guard and you're set up for success and people can support you with making that experiment successful. The next point is great collaboration does not mean an overly consensus-driven culture where everybody's voice and everybody's opinion has to be factored in, and until everyone's satisfied, you cannot move forward and make decisions. That is a nuance. You as a PM, especially when it comes to key product decisions, you still own the ultimate decision. But knowing when to actually step in and steer the team in the right path is the art here in terms of great collaboration. And I've mentioned this point many times already. Just wanted to reinforce that a lot of this is about the team, right? The more you as a PM leader, you have a lot of control. So think about ways in which you can influence the culture of your team and how you can grow as a people leader. Then it'll really up-level your team's output and execution and just overall happiness. So with that, just to close out the 3 C's, I'll introduce the bonus C, which is communication. I think at the core of all of this is how we communicate. It's how we communicate that shared context and keep reinforcing it every day. It's about how you communicate to empower your teammates to produce the best output and not communicating just to get tasks done. It's about how you communicate with your teammates as humans with empathy and how do you build strong relationships that way. If you make people more of a priority in your PM career, and you and your team will be having a lot more impact in this world. Good luck with that. Thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or find me on LinkedIn. We'll share out this deck as well through the Product School channels. Thanks for listening.